Hello, dear viewers. Today we will be focusing on one of the pivotal moments of the Vietnam War in America. But this attack was not just a military conflict. It was also an event that changed the social and psychological dimensions of war. We are going to closely examine the background, development, and consequences of the Tet Offensive in order to gain insights into this pivotal moment in America's Vietnam War. We will examine how the dynamics between the factions involved in the war, the element of surprise, and the role they played in shaping the course of the war had a profound impact on American society and politics with the Tet Offensive. Throughout this video, we're going to come together to understand the strategic significance of the Tet Offensive, its impact on the course of the war, and the overall dynamics of the Vietnam War. It's important to remember that this event is not just a military conflict, but also a societal turning point. Are you ready? All right then, let us commence on a voyage towards the Tet attack. Are you prepared to explore and unveil what sort of impact America's daring expedition in Vietnam has imprinted on the pages of history?
In 1967, the North Vietnamese leadership debated intensely on how to proceed with the war. Some in the government, including Defense Minister Von Nguyen Giap, advocated opening negotiations and taking a defensive approach, while others called for fighting as well as pursuing a conventional military path to reunify the country. Given the heavy casualties and the weakening of their economy under the American bombing campaign, the decision was taken to launch a large-scale offensive. This approach was justified by the belief that South Vietnamese soldiers were no longer effective in the war and that the American presence was extremely unpopular in the country. Leaders believed that once the offensive began, a mass uprising would break out across South Vietnam. The operation, dubbed General Offensive, General Uprising, was planned for the Tet holiday in January 1968. The preliminary preparatory phase involved launching spectacular attacks in the border areas to draw American troops away from the cities. One of these would be a major effort against the Khe Sanh American Naval Base in northwestern South Vietnam. Once this was completed, larger attacks would begin and Viet Cong insurgents would attack population centers and American bases. The ultimate goal of the offensive was the destruction of the South Vietnamese government and military forces through a popular uprising and the eventual withdrawal of American forces. Therefore, a massive propaganda offensive would be carried out alongside the military operations. Preparation for the offensive began in mid-1967, and eventually 7 regiments and 20 battalions moved south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In addition, the Viet Cong were rearmed with AK-47 assault rifles and RPG-2 grenade launchers. On January 21, 1968, a massive artillery attack was launched on Khe Sanh. This signaled a siege and battle that would last 77 days and see 6,000 Marines stand up to 20,000 North Vietnamese. In response to the fighting, General William Westmoreland, in command of U.S. and ARVN forces, diverted reinforcements north, concerned that North Vietnam intended to seize the northern provinces of the I Corps tactical zone. At the suggestion of Major General Frederick Wyand, the 3rd Corps commander, additional forces were also redeployed to the area around Saigon. This decision was critical in the fighting that followed. Following the plan, which hoped to draw American forces into the fighting at Khe Sanh, Viet Cong units broke the traditional Tet ceasefire on January 30, 1968, and launched major attacks on most cities in South Vietnam. These were generally repulsed, and no ARVN units fled or betrayed. For 2 months, U.S. and ARVN forces under Westmoreland successfully repelled the Viet Cong offensive, with particularly intense fighting in the cities of Hue and Saigon. In Saigon, Viet Cong forces were destroyed after they managed to breach the U.S. Embassy wall. After the fighting ended, the Viet Cong were permanently paralyzed and no longer an effective fighting force. On April 1st, U.S. forces launched Operation Pegasus to relieve the Marines at Khe Sanh. This involved elements of the 1st and 3rd Marine Brigades advancing along Route 9 towards Khe Sanh, and the 1st Air Cavalry Division seizing key terrain along the line of advance by helicopter. Once the road to Khe Sanh, Road 9, was cleared by this mix of air and ground forces, the first major engagement took place on April 6th after a day-long battle with a Pavan-blocking force. Continuing to advance, U.S. troops joined up with the encircled Marines on April 8th, after the majority of the fighting culminated in a 3-day battle near the village of Khe Sanh. The Tet Offensive was a military victory for the U.S. and the ARVN, but a political and media disaster. Public support eroded as Americans began to question the conduct of the conflict. Others were skeptical of Westmoreland's ability to command, leading to his replacement by General Crichton Abrams in June 1968. President Johnson's popularity plummeted, and he withdrew from running for re-election. In the end, it was the media backlash and emphasis on the widening credibility gap that did the most damage to the Johnson administration's efforts. Prominent journalists such as Walter Cronkite began to openly criticize Johnson and the military leadership and demanded a negotiated end to the war. Although Johnson's expectations were low, in May 1968 he initiated peace talks with North Vietnam.